In this tour, we're going to have a quick look at the CrystalMaker user interface, as shown in a typical document window. Here I've opened up an inorganic crystal structure, and we can see that the window is divided into a series of sections. Starting at the top, we have a typical toolbar. This is customizable. Just right-click and use the displayed sheet to add or remove tools. Some of the buttons, such as the rotate button, display popovers. This allows us to pack more functionality into a smaller space without clutter. But if you need to show the popover permanently, you can drag it away from the toolbar to detach it and then leave it open. By default, a tool strip appears below the toolbar. You can toggle this on or off using the Tools button or via the View menu. The tool strip provides a series of tools for manipulating or measuring your structure. Most of the time you're probably going to be using this hand tool or the rotate tool, which allows you to grab and rotate your structure. Now the structure is shown in the graphics pane below the tool strip. This is the most important part of the window. And with the rotate tool selected, you can click and drag to rotate your model. Now if you have a multi-touch trackpad, you can rotate by sliding two fingers left to right. This is like a horizontal scroll wheel, or up and down, which is like a vertical scroll wheel. To rotate about an axis out of the screen, use a standard rotation gesture, or you can hold the Shift key down and click and drag to rotate. If you're a Mac user, then you can use AI-powered hand tracking to rotate your structure, and we'll have a video on that later. If you're a Windows user, there is the option of using a leap motion controller to rotate the structure using simple hand gestures. Use the Orient button in the toolbar to set a specific view direction, and use the rotator to apply a rotation around a specific angle. On the left-hand side of the screen, we can display a sidebar. This lets you work with multiple structures in the same window. Each structure has its own thumbnail, and you can display this as either a list of thumbnails or as a list view, a more compact layout for more structures. Use this Actions button to process your list and sort. Use the Add pop-up to add more structures to the sidebar. On the right hand side of the screen, we have an inspector, and this is your mission control, an interactive series of tools that act in real time to provide powerful adjustments of your structure and its display. Now before we dive into the inspector, here's a quick tip. If you're working with a small screen, you can keep both the sidebar and the inspector hidden. When you need to use them, just move the mouse close to the edge of the window and the appropriate pane will slide into view, and you can work inside that pane, and then when you move the mouse outside, it disappears. We'll do the same for the sidebar. Slides into view, move the mouse back out, and it slides away. Let's take a more detailed look at the inspector. The inspector is divided into a series of tabbed panes, which you can access here in the tab bar. First up is the Info Inspector, and you'll see this is divided into a rich text notes pane, and underneath that is an info pane, and these are adjustable in terms of size. You can enter text to describe your structure. and this can be searched using Crystal Viewer. Use the rich text editing controls on the Edit menu, or right-click to display a contextual menu with editing commands. Below the Notes field is a Keywords field. You can type in your own search terms and save them as keywords. For example, here we might describe this as a member of the Spinel group. Spinel group. We hit return, and now we have a keyword or a search phrase entered for this. If we want to delete that, we can just click to select it and then hit delete. Below this is the info area, and this is text which is automatically generated by the program and that includes information such as the chemical formula and the space group and the density and the cell parameters and so on. You'll also see a second tab which lists the contents of atoms in the asymmetric unit, the occupancies and the fractional coordinates. Continuing on to the next Inspector tab, the Model Inspector. Here we find a series of 4 subtabs: atoms, bonds, planes and volume. These are all lists of atoms, lists of bond requests, lists of planes if we have any, and lists of volumetric data. Let's start off from the left. So the Atoms group, or the Atoms Inspector, provides a key to the colours and styles used by your structure. And these atoms are grouped by chemical element. Each element row has a disclosure triangle which you can open to show any sites that share the same element symbol. This structure just has one site per element, but many structures have quite a few sites with the same element symbol. And this allows you to process information by site or by element. Now from left to right, we have a style icon, and that's coloured according to your preset colour for that site. You can click this and you can choose from one of any number of 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional styles, happy aluminiums, or maybe photo-rendered aluminiums. We then have a colour button that allows us to change the colours of either all elements or all sites. Then we have the radius of that site in angstrom units. This is the space filling radius. Currently we're looking at a ball and stick plot, so the radii is smaller than that. And then we have a summary of the coordination. We have a button to toggle atom labels on or off. And then we have a button that allows us to toggle the visibility of that element or site. We can do a lot more with this Atoms Inspector, and you'll find a series of handy commands available under this Actions menu whose icon is shown here. So for example, we can expand and contract the list. We can group the list by element as shown here, by molecule if it were a molecular crystal, or we can show a flat view. And we have various sorting options. We can automatically adjust labeling and coloring, atomic radii, and so on. Let's move on to the Bonds Inspector. This lets you control the automatic generation of bonds in CrystalMaker, and you do this by specifying element pairs and distances. To be specific, you specify a distance range. For example, here we are requesting bonds between magnesium and oxygen atoms that lie within the distance range 0 to 2 angstrom units. That is a bond specification. And for each bond specification, you can specify a style. So you have a wide range of different sorts of bonds, including cylinders, dots, dashes in either 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, as well as double bonds and triple bonds. You can choose to label bonds. The distance of the bond length will be shown there, and you can set the colouring using one of our standard colour buttons. And on the right hand side over here, we have a preview of what the coordination state is likely to be for that bond specification. Here it's telling us that each magnesium atom is going to be coordinated by 4 oxygens and each oxygen by 1 magnesium. Now, when you're editing a new structure, if you're not quite sure what the bond specification should be, what that bond range should be, you can click this little icon here, this histogram icon, and CrystalMaker will show you a distance histogram showing the numbers of atoms as a function of distance just for that element pair. So here we can see that the first bond from magnesium to oxygen is just under 2 angstroms, and there's another bond, or another distance rather, close to 3.5 angstroms, which we shall ignore. You can click on here to display a little cursor, and you can measure these distances more precisely. So this gives you a very quick reference. If you wanted to add a new bond, you would just double click, and you would use the pop-ups to assign a new distance range, and so on. We'll delete that for the moment. You may also notice this number 1 here in the button. You can click that to toggle between defining a primary bond or a secondary bond. This is really only relevant for organic crystals, specifically molecular crystals, where you might want to show weak interactions between molecules. We call those secondary bonds, as opposed to the strong covalent bonds within a molecule, which we call the primary bonds. It's important to be able to differentiate between those two sorts of bonds, otherwise you'll end up with an infinite framework structure, and CrystalMaker won't be able to determine which are the individual molecules. Again, you can use the Actions menu up here as a convenience. The next inspector is the Planes Inspector, and this allows you to manage multiple sets of lattice planes, including parallel sets of planes. We can just double click to add a new plane. We get 111 by default, but we can edit this if we wanted to. So we might want to have 110, hit return, and there is our 110 plane. We can use the little slider to adjust the opacity of the plane. We can adjust its color. Something lurid is always good for standing out. And we can move it along the plane normal. This is useful if you want to be able to slice your crystal. Now, for teaching purposes, sometimes it's useful to show a set of parallel planes, and you can do that by clicking on this little selector button here. And now we have a set of planes parallel to 110. Again, we can move them along the plane normal. For teaching purposes, you might want to have them locked to the intercepts. You can show as many planes as you like, and if we move up to the Actions menu, we can show symmetry related planes as well. We can choose to have these automatically coloured as well, and we can end up with a nice plot showing all the symmetry relationships. For now, I'm going to just select these and delete them. The final inspector in our group of 4 list inspectors is the volume inspector. Here we can add volumetric data. Now, CrystalMaker can automatically generate electron density, distance, and porosity maps. But you can also import volumetric data sets, for example, charge density from other programs, and these can be displayed in a variety of styles together with a crystal structure in the same window. Let's move along to our third main inspector tab, the Extras Inspector. There are a lot of items shown here, and these allow you to fine-tune many of these styles of your model. We have a series of disclosure groups which you can open up by clicking on the little disclosure triangle or clicking on the title of the item. So for example, we can toggle our axes in the bottom left hand corner on or off. We can change their colouring and so on. One of the more useful groups is the background inspector. So we can change our background colour or style, or we can switch to a gradient. You might also find it useful to play around with the lighting. We can have multiple light sources in CrystalMaker as well as a fixed ambient light. You can turn on these checkboxes and you can adjust the brightnesses of the different lights and their directions. Click on the little stereogram here and then we can adjust the direction of the light source in real time, and you can get a very nice photorealistic display. The model elements themselves, the atoms, the bonds, the polyhedra, the surfaces, all have a reflectivity which will reflect those light sources that you've defined, and you can customize those to your heart's content. Let's look at the atoms, and you'll see that we have a series of sliders that will let you adjust the properties of the reflectance. There are some presets, thank goodness, and we can work our way through those. We have a flat preset, we have a chalk preset, we have rubber, wax, plastic, and China is quite a nice preset that we find useful to use in the program. Something else that might be useful is to go down and turn on perspective, and in CrystalMaker 11 we have a new auto option for perspective that will adjust the view distance depending on the current scale of the model. We've now covered the three main inspector tabs, but there's one other inspector you may meet. If anything in your structure is selected, then you may see a special selection inspector. For example, if I choose the arrow tool from the toolbar and select this oxygen atom, then we see a new selection inspector covering up the main inspector, and this displays the properties of the selected object or group of objects. So for example, we've got information on the selected atom, its coordinates, its symmetry, its bonds. And we also have additional information about the visual style of that object. We could change it, we could make it a happy oxygen atom, and we could change its colour. So let's make it yellow so it stands out from the other oxygens. Now this is useful if you want to visually distinguish individual atoms rather than groups of atoms by site or by element. To get rid of the selection inspector, you can just click its little close box. If for some reason you want to bring it back, just click again on the selected object and the selection inspector will reappear. Let's look at some additional items in the graphics pane. In the top right hand corner we'll see a legend. This is the key to the colours and styles in your plot, and you can click and drag this to different parts of the screen. You'll see that it docks into one of 8 different positions in the different corners or centres of the screen. If you click down on here, you get a dedicated inspector which allows you to set the font, style and size and some other properties such as the frame or the background. And it also allows you to hide the legend if you don't want that visible. Again, we can close the inspector by clicking its little close box. Now in the bottom right hand corner of the window, by default, we have a scale bar. As with the legend, you can click and drag that to different parts of the window. It can be on the side or in the corner, in the middle, and so on. Sometimes this is actually useful as a quick mini ruler for measuring distances in the plane of the screen. Again, we can click on here to display an inspector, and we can change many aspects of the display style, including the font size and style. And we've already met our axes, and these are currently shown in the bottom left hand corner of the window. Now these are slightly different because they are part of the model, they are three-dimensional objects, and we need to go to the extras inspector to adjust their settings, including the colours, the styles and the position. Now, CrystalMaker is more than just a display program. It's a very powerful modeling program as well. And that means that we're going to end up with some numbers at some point in time, and we need somewhere to display those. So each document window has the option of an output pane. So we click the little output button in the toolbar, or we can go to the view menu and we can go to the output log control. And we have an output pane. And the output pane shows the results of many different calculations in the structure. And we can display that horizontally like this, or vertically. And of course we can resize it as well. Click the close box to hide it. So that's a quick overview of the geography of our document window interface.